The moment Noemi Bastidas pushed open the wrong door, she heard a sound she was never supposed to hear: a man weeping. Not the polite kind of weeping, the kind people did at funerals when they were performing grief. This was the other kind. The kind that came from somewhere deep, somewhere broken, the kind that didn't know anyone was listening. She froze in the doorway with a stack of folded linens pressed against her chest. The study was dim. A single green-shaded lamp burned on the desk. And there, kneeling on the rug with his forehead pressed against the edge of an overstuffed leather chair, was Rodion Varanov, the man who had built an empire on silence, the man whose name made councilmen lower their voices in restaurants, the man who, only 6 hours ago, had sat at the head of a dinner table and discussed which of his enemies would not see Christmas. He was crying like a child. In his hand, gripped white-knuckled, was a small framed photograph. Noemi could not see the face inside it. She did not need to. The way he held it told her everything, like a man clutching the last warm thing in a freezing world. She should have left. Every instinct she had spent 26 years sharpening, every survival instinct beaten into her by a childhood of being unwelcome in too many rooms, screamed at her to back away, close the door, pretend she had never seen anything. But her feet would not move. And then, as if the room itself had betrayed her, the floorboard beneath her left foot let out a small wooden sigh. His head snapped up. For one terrible second, Rodion Varanov stared at her across the dim study with eyes red-rimmed and wild, the photograph still gripped in his hand. Noemi saw the moment he calculated it, the moment the most dangerous man in the city understood that the wrong person had just walked in on him at his weakest. She watched his hand move toward the inside of his jacket. And in that suspended, breath-held second, Noemi Bastidas opened her mouth and said the one thing she was absolutely, completely, unforgivably not supposed to say. "She wouldn't want you to die alone in a study, sir." The hand stopped. The room went so quiet she could hear the radiator ticking 3 rooms away. Rodion Varanov, who had not been spoken to that way in 20 years, slowly lowered his hand. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. As though she had not been cleaning the floors of this house for 9 months. As though she had just appeared in his life summoned by some grief he had not yet given a name to. "What did you just say to me?" he whispered. Noemi's heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. But something inside her, something older than fear, something that had survived worse rooms than this, held her steady. "I said," she repeated, quieter still, "she wouldn't want you to die alone in a study." What neither of them knew yet was that this was the first sentence of a story that would, in less than 4 weeks, bring the entire Varanov empire to its knees. Before I tell you what happened next, do me a favor. Drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled tonight. And if you stay until the very end, you'll understand why a single sentence whispered in a dark room changed not just one life, but everyone connected to it. Hit that like button if you believe sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that finally tells the truth. And now let's begin. The Varanov estate did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress that had been forced to wear a tuxedo. It sat at the end of a private road in the Old Hill district, a 3-story stone house with shuttered windows and a gravel drive that crunched under every footstep, as if the ground itself was made to inform on you. 8 live-in staff, 2 drivers, 4 men in dark coats who were never introduced by name. An iron gate that opened only when someone on the inside decided it should. Noemi Bastidas had worked there for 9 months, and in those 9 months, she had perfected one art above all others: the art of not existing. She arrived at 6 in the morning and left at 9 at night. She moved through the house like a draft of cold air, present in every room, noticed in none. She polished banisters that no one touched. She ironed pillowcases that were never slept on. She watered orchids in a sunroom the family used twice a year. She had learned, very young, that invisibility was a kind of safety. Her grandmother, who had raised her in a tin-roofed house at the edge of a fishing town 300 kilometers south, had told her once, "Mija, in this world there are people who are seen, and people who survive. Pick survival. The seen are always the first to be hunted." Noemi had taken that lesson and folded it small and carried it in her chest like a stone. She did not speak unless spoken to. When the housekeeper, Mirabel Quesada, gave her instructions, she nodded. When the cook, a tired old Sicilian named Tomas Ferraro, slid her a bowl of soup at the back of the kitchen, she ate it without comment. When the men in dark coats walked past her in the corridor and one of them brushed her shoulder hard enough to bruise, she did not flinch. She was a ghost in a black uniform. And ghosts, she had learned, were rarely killed twice. Her reasons for being there were not romantic. Her younger brother, Esteban, was 16 and had a heart condition that required medication that cost more per month than most people in her old neighborhood earned in 3. Their mother had died when Esteban was 4. Their father had not been heard from since. The Varanov estate paid almost 3 times what any other domestic position in the city paid, and nobody who worked there had to ask why. Some money was clean, some money was laundered, some money was, as Tomas once said over soup, just rinsed. Noemi had decided long ago that rinsed money still bought medicine, so she did her work. She kept her head down. She did not ask questions about the men who came at midnight, or the cars that idled in the drive with their lights off, or the locked rooms on the second floor that Mirabel had told her, on her first day, were never to be entered. She had been good at the rules, excellent at them. Until tonight, when she had taken the wrong staircase, carrying a stack of clean linens, and pushed open the wrong door, and found her employer kneeling on the floor in the dark, weeping into the back of a chair, and said a thing she should not have said. Now, standing in the doorway with his eyes locked on her and his hand still resting against the lapel of his jacket, Noemi understood with the clarity that only true danger brings that her months of careful invisibility had just ended. The only question was whether she would be allowed to leave it alive. She did not sleep that night. She had backed out of the study slowly, the way you back away from an animal you are not sure is wounded or hunting. He had not stopped her. He had only watched her until the door clicked shut, and then she had walked, not run, the entire length of the corridor and down the servants' stairs. In her tiny attic room, she sat on the edge of her narrow bed for the rest of the night, with her uniform still on, and waited. She waited for footsteps in the corridor, for one of the men in dark coats to come and tell her, quietly, that her services were no longer required. She had heard the rumors of what no longer required meant in this house. Tomas had once told her, half joking, that the last housekeeper before Mirabel had been no longer required on a Tuesday and had, by Friday, become a missing person poster on a bus stop in another city. But the footsteps did not come. The sun rose, gray and reluctant. Noemi changed into a fresh uniform and went down to the kitchen, because doing what she was supposed to do was the only protective spell she had ever known. Tomas was already at the stove. He glanced up, frowned, and set down a cup of black coffee on the counter beside her. "You look like a girl who didn't sleep." "I didn't." He did not ask why. At 9:45, Mirabel Quesada appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Bastidas, Mr. Varanov requests you in the East Library at 10. The kitchen went still. Tomas froze with his ladle halfway to a pot. The young pantry boy, a 15-year-old named Iker, looked up wide-eyed and looked down again as though he had been caught watching an execution. "Yes, ma'am," Noemi said. "Don't be late." Mirabel left. The kitchen exhaled. "Nina," Tomas said quietly, without turning around. "Whatever it is, you did not see it. You did not hear it. You do not know. Comprende?" "Si," Noemi said. But she did know. And she had said, she knocked at exactly 10. "Come." Rodion Varanov was standing at the tall window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the gray morning. He wore the sharp black suit he wore the way other men wore armor. There was no sign of the kneeling man from last night. He had folded that man up and put him away somewhere only he had the key to. "Close the door. Lock it." She did both. He turned. He was in his early 40s, she had always guessed, though grief had aged him in places that did not show. A long, narrow face, dark hair cut short, a faint scar at the edge of his jaw. eyes the gray of a winter sea. They missed nothing. Sit. She sat. Tell me your name. Your full name. Noemi Bastidas, sir. How long have you worked in this house? 9 months, sir. Where are you from? Puerto Caleta, sir. South Coast. Family? A brother. He's 16. Parents? My mother passed when I was 13. I don't know where my father is. He absorbed each answer without expression. It was the way a man might inventory a room he was about to either redecorate or burn down. Last night, you walked into a room you should not have walked into. You saw something you should not have seen. And you said something to me that no one in this house, in this city, in this country, has said to me in 15 years. She did not answer. Most people in your position would now be begging, or weeping, or attempting, very cleverly, to convince me that they did not see what they saw. You are doing none of those things. No, sir. Why not? She looked up at him, truly looked, and what she saw in those gray winter sea eyes was not the man who could end her with a phone call. It was the other man, the one from last night, kneeling in the dark with a photograph in his fist. He had folded that man up, but he had not, she realized, locked the box quite tightly enough. Because, sir, she said, if you were going to kill me, you would have sent one of the men in the coats, not asked Mirabelle to fetch me to the library at 10 in the morning. You don't summon people you intend to disappear. You just disappear them. Rodion Varanov went still. And then, for the first time in 15 years, by his own private reckoning, he laughed. A surprised, exhausted, cracked open kind of laugh, the kind that escapes a man before he has decided whether to allow it. Miss Bastidis, I am going to make you an offer. If you accept it, your life as you have known it will end. If you refuse it, your life as you have known it will also end. The only question is which ending you would prefer. He sat down behind the desk and laced his fingers together. Now, shall we talk? He let the question hang in the air between them like smoke. What is the offer, sir? In 3 weeks and 4 days, the Marisova family will host a private gathering at the old Sable Rock Hotel. Every family of consequence in this country will be there. No press, no police, no protection beyond what each man brings through the door. He paused. I am required to attend. I am required to bring a companion. And I am required, for reasons I will not explain to you this morning, to bring one who is not from any of the families. Someone unconnected. Someone clean. Sir, I am not. I have not finished. She closed her mouth. I am not asking you to be my mistress. I am asking you to walk into that hotel on my arm, sit at a table with men whose hands have done things you do not want to imagine, eat the food they put in front of you, and leave when I leave. That is all, one night. And in return? In return, I will pay every medical bill your brother will incur for the rest of his life. Every prescription, every specialist, every surgery. I will set up an account in his name, administered by a lawyer of your choosing, that he cannot lose access to even if I am dead. And I will pay you, personally, an amount that will allow you to never clean another floor as long as you live. Her hands went numb in her lap. Why me? Because last night, you said to me a sentence that no one else in my life would have had the courage, or the decency, or the foolishness to say. Because of that sentence, I now know 2 things about you. I know that you see clearly, and I know that you do not flinch. Sir, those are not qualifications for— They are the only qualifications, he said quietly, that matter in the room you would be walking into. He poured himself a glass of water, drank half of it, set it down. You have until tomorrow morning to give me your answer. If you refuse, you will continue your duties in this house as before, and we will neither of us speak of last night again. If you accept your life changes tonight. She nodded. She could not yet speak. You may go. She stood, crossed to the door, unlocked it, and was halfway through when his voice stopped her. Miss Bastidas, how did you know that she would not have wanted me to die alone in a study? She held the doorframe. Because, sir, she said softly, no one ever does. She closed the door behind her. That night, instead of returning to her attic, Noemi did something she had not done in 9 months. She left the estate. She told Mirabel she needed to visit her brother. Noemi caught the late bus down the hill and rode it to the small clinic neighborhood where she had grown up. Esteban was at the kitchen table with a textbook open in front of him. He looked up when she came in, and his whole face changed that quick, helpless brightening that younger brothers cannot hide. Nemi. She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him from behind and held him longer than she had meant to. She sat down across from him and watched him work. He had wanted, since he was small, to be a doctor. The boy who had been cut open had decided he wanted to be the one who cut, gently, to heal. He did not yet know how impossible that was, that medical school cost what their family did not have and would never have, that his condition meant insurers would not touch him, that the future he was studying for was a future built entirely on hope. She had known this for years. She had not yet found the courage to tell him. She watched him write, and she thought about a man kneeling in a dark study with a photograph in his fist. She thought about an offer that would buy her brother every prescription he would ever need. And she thought about something else. Something she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it. The girl she had been before her mother died. The girl whose teacher, Senora Olarte, had once knelt down beside her desk and said, "Noemi, you have a gift, and gifts do not stay buried forever." That girl had not been small. That girl had not been a ghost. That girl was still in there somewhere, folded up small and put away, the way Rodion had folded up the kneeling man. But neither of them had locked the box quite tightly enough. She kissed her brother on the top of his head and rode the bus back up the hill in the dark. By the time she walked through the iron gate, she had her answer. She told him at 6 in the morning. Yes, to all of it, with one condition. He raised an eyebrow. My brother's account, the one administered by a lawyer of my choosing. I want it set up before the night of the gathering, not after. Signed, witnessed, irrevocable. So that whatever happens in that hotel, whether I leave it walking or not, my brother's medicine is paid for. He looked at her. You are negotiating, he said, as if you expect not to come home. I am negotiating, sir, as if I have learned not to make assumptions. He almost laughed. Done. The papers will be ready by Friday. You will choose the lawyer. I will pay him. Thank you, sir. Stop calling me sir. In private, if we are to survive a room full of men who can smell falseness across a banquet hall, you cannot speak to me like a maid. In public, in this house, sir, Mr. Varanov, whatever you wish. But when it is the two of us preparing for this Rodion. Rodion, she said, testing it. He nodded once and returned to his coffee. The next 3 weeks did not look, from the outside, like a transformation. She continued her duties. Mirabel watched her with new and narrow attention, but said nothing. But in the evenings, after her shift, Noemi did not go to the attic. She went to the East Library. There, behind a locked door, Rodion gave her the only education that mattered. He did not teach her how to walk in heels, those, he said, she would either possess or improvise. He taught her instead the geography of the room she was about to enter. He taught her the families, the Marisovas, who hosted, and what they considered a slight, the Okonkos, who controlled the eastern ports, and which of their sons was a fool. The old man, Esposito ran, who had killed his own brother in 1991 and would speak only to women who looked him directly in the eye. The Veit twins, who finished each other's sentences and would test her by switching seats during dinner. He taught her the alliances and the grudges and the unspoken rules. He taught her which silences were polite and which were lethal. He gave her books to read. Strategy, history, the memoirs of a Sicilian judge who had survived 3 assassination attempts. She read them in the attic by lamplight, and something old and almost forgotten in her began to wake up. Tomas Ferraro noticed first. Nina, he said one afternoon, sliding her a bowl of soup. You walk different. Like a person who is no longer hiding from the ceiling. She laughed. It surprised her. She had not laughed in the kitchen in 9 months. Tomas studied her. Then he reached under his apron and pulled out a small object wrapped in a cloth and slid it across the counter. A kitchen knife. Small, sharp, with a leather sheath for the inside of your shoe. On the night. Tomas. I will not ask what is happening, but a girl who suddenly walks like she is no longer hiding is a girl who is about to be put somewhere she should not be. So. He pushed the knife another inch toward her. Take it. She took it. And, Nina. Yes? Come back. For the dress. She did not ask Rodion. She did not want anything from his world clinging to her on the night she walked into it. On her one half-day off, she took the bus down into the old garment district and walked into a tailor's shop with a faded sign that read, F. Quirino and daughter, alterations, since 1971. The daughter, who looked 70 if she was a day, sat behind a sewing machine with a measuring tape draped around her neck like a stole. I need a dress. For an evening. It must look like it cost a great deal of money. It must, in fact, have cost very little. And it must be ready in 2 weeks. Felicidad Quirino looked her up and down once. Why? Noemi told her not about Rodion or the gathering, but that she was going into a room full of people who would expect her to be small, and she did not intend to be small, and she needed armor that did not look like armor. The old woman walked to the back of the shop and returned carrying a bolt of fabric so dark it seemed to drink the light. Deep, deep green, the color of a forest at dusk. This was meant for a woman who never came back to collect it. It has been waiting 12 years. She unfurled a corner. It was the most beautiful thing Noemi had ever touched. It is yours, if you promise me one thing. Anything. That whoever you are walking in to face you will not apologize to them for existing in their presence. I won't. The old woman picked up her measuring tape. It happened on the evening of the 18th day. Rodion had been quizzing her on the Vate twins, on which one favored his right hand and which his left. She had answered every question correctly. He set down his glass and looked at her. You are ready. I'm not ready. You are more ready than I was the first time I walked into that room, and I had been raised for it since I was 8. She said the thing she had been wanting to ask for 2 weeks. Rodion, who was she? She did not need to specify. He knew. He looked down at his glass, and she thought he would not answer. When he spoke, my sister. Her name was Veska. She was 22. The best of us, the only one, I think, who was truly good. She was killed 15 years ago this November by a man who wanted to send a message to my father. She was not part of the business. She was not a target. She was a message. Noemi held very still. I have, over the years, killed many men. Some of them deserved it, some of them did not. I have stopped pretending I can tell the difference. But the man who killed her, I have never found him. 15 years. Every resource I have, every favor I am owed. Nothing. He took a slow breath. On the anniversary, every year, I sit in that study with her photograph, and I ask her to forgive me for failing her. And every year she does not answer. Because she is dead, and that is what dead people do. Rodion. You said to me that she would not want me to die alone in a study. How did you know that? Because no one who was good would want anyone to die alone anywhere. He closed his eyes. For a stretch of silence, neither of them spoke. When he opened his eyes, something in his face had shifted, some hard, ancient thing had cracked. Just a little, just enough. He was looking at her not as an employee, not as an instrument. He was looking at her as a person. Possibly the first person in 15 years who had been allowed to see him without his armor on. There is something you should know before the night of the gathering. Something that may change your decision. She waited. The man who hosts the gathering. Vasily Marisov, the head of the family. I have reason to believe, strong reason, that he is the one who ordered my sister's death. The library went very still. And on the night of the gathering, in his own hotel, at his own table, in front of every family that matters in this country, I intend to find out for certain. And if I am right, I intend to do something about it. Noemi understood then what she had agreed to. She had not been hired to be a companion. She had been hired to be a witness. A clean, unconnected, unflinching witness who saw clearly and did not flinch to a reckoning that no one in that room, except Rodion Varanov, would survive without scars. Rodion, you should have told me this on the first morning. I know. And you should have offered me a great deal more money. For the second time in 15 years, Rodion Varanov laughed. And Noemi Bastidas, who had walked into a dark study 18 days ago carrying a stack of folded linens, smiled at him, the small, quiet, dangerous smile of a woman who had stopped being a ghost. Rodion. Yes, I'm still going. The Sable Rock Hotel sat on a cliff at the edge of the city, like a building put there to watch the sea decide what to do. It had been built in 1894 by a copper baron who had wanted somewhere private to entertain people who did not exist on guest lists. Its facade was pale limestone, weather-stained at the corners. Its windows were tall and narrow and lit, that night, with the kind of warm yellow light that made the building look from the outside almost welcoming. It was not welcoming. Noemi understood this the moment her car turned onto the long drive and she saw the men standing every 20 meters along the road. They held their hands at their sides in the particular way that men hold their hands when they are trained to draw quickly. She had insisted on arriving in her own car. Rodion had argued. She had not yielded. If I walk in beside you, I am yours. If I walk in alone, I am mine. There is a difference. And tonight, the difference matters. So she rode up the cliff road with the deep green dress arranged carefully across her lap, and Tomas Ferraro's small leather-sheathed knife pressed cold against the inside of her left shoe, and her grandmother's voice in her head saying, Mija, the seen are the first to be hunted, and for the first time in her life, Noemi Bastidas was choosing, deliberately, to be seen. The car stopped under the portico. A doorman opened her door without expression. She stepped out. The dress moved with her like water. Felicidad Quirino had cut the dark green silk not to flatter but to present. To say, here she is, look, as long as you wish. You will not make her look away. Noemi had pinned her hair up simply, the way her mother had taught her when she was 10. She wore no jewelry, except a small silver pendant her grandmother had pressed into her palm the morning she left Puerto Caleta for the city. The lobby was full of men. Some turned to look at her. Some did not. The ones who did not, she understood instantly, were the more dangerous ones. She crossed the marble floor without hurrying, and she did not search the room for Rodion, because Rodion had told her that searching was the mark of a woman who needed someone, and tonight she needed no one. A small, sharp-faced man in a charcoal suit detached himself from a cluster near the elevator and stepped into her path. You must be lost, my dear. His smile did not move his eyes. This is a private event. I'm not lost. This event is by invitation only. I know. And you are? Noemi Bastidas. He blinked. The blink told her everything. He had a list. Her name was on it. He had not expected her name to walk in attached to her face. Of course. Forgive me. The dining hall is on the second floor. She walked past him. At the foot of the staircase, a young man was leaning against the banister with a glass of something amber in his hand. He wore a dark jacket over an open-collared shirt, and he had the rumpled, sleepless look of a person who had been somewhere else recently and was about to be somewhere else again. You're new. I'm a guest. I didn't say you weren't. I said you're new. He pushed off the banister. Yannick Petrescu, Continental Ledger. They let me into one of these every 2 years on the condition I write nothing about it. I'm here because I am very, very bad at conditions. She almost smiled. And you are here because? Because I was invited. By Rodion Varanov. The amber liquid stopped halfway to his mouth. Varanov brought a date. To the Marisov gathering. Yes. Do you know what Vasily Marisov is going to do when you walk into that dining hall on Varanov's arm? No. Neither does anyone else. He held out a small white card. If you survive the evening, call this number. She slipped it into the small clutch at her wrist. Mr. Petrescu, what does Vasily Marisov look like? He studied her and answered honestly. He looks like a man who has never been told no, and he is sitting at the head of the long table on the second floor. waiting to find out if tonight will be the first time. She climbed the stairs. At the top, Rodion was waiting. He had been watching the lobby through the railing. He did not move toward her. He let her come to him. You walked in alone. I walked in alone. Are you ready? No. Good. The ones who think they are ready are the ones who die. He offered his arm. She took it. Together, they walked into the dining hall, a room of 40 men, 7 women, and one long table set with silver, and at the head of the table, an old man with white hair and pale eyes, who looked up the moment they entered, and smiled the smile of a man who was about to be told no for the first time in his life, and did not yet know it. The dining hall fell, by inches, into silence, the slow, considered silence of 40 people, deciding, in the same instant, that the rest of their evening was going to be more interesting than they had anticipated. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. The Veit twins exchanged one glance, and did not exchange another. Vasily Marisov rose from his chair. He was very old, 80 at least. His skin had the translucent fragility of a man who had outlived several of his own diseases. But his eyes, when they fixed on her, were the eyes of a much younger and more dangerous animal. Rodion, you brought a guest. As required. As required, yes. Vasily's gaze had not left Noemi. And what is your name, child? Noemi Bastidas. Bastidas. I do not know that name. No, sir. You wouldn't. And what do you do, Miss Bastidas, when you are not on Mr. Varanov's arm? The room was listening. She had rehearsed perhaps 20 different answers to this question. She used none of them. I clean Mr. Varanov's house, sir. I am his maid. The dining hall did not erupt. It went still, the perfect, frozen stillness of 40 men who had spent their lives reading rooms, and were each, in this moment, recalculating what the room they were sitting in actually was. Vasily Marisov stood without moving, and then he laughed thin and dry and old, with nothing in it of surprise. Only delight, the cold delight of a man handed an unexpected dessert. Rodion, 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 he shook his head. You have brought a maid to my table, in a green dress, to make a point. I am, of course, fascinated. Sit, both of you. Sit, eat. Tell us all about her. They sat. Rodion was at Vasily's right hand. Noemi was at Rodion's right. Across from her, an enormous man, with a shaved head and a face like a closed door, watched her with the patient attention of a man told, before dinner, to memorize her. The first course came. Noemi ate it with the correct spoon. She had, in 9 months of polishing Varanov silver, learned which spoon was which. The conversation began carefully, small talk about ports, a senator's recent illness, a horse one of the Esposito Ran's sons had bought in Argentina. Noemi did not speak. She watched a small, terrible play unfold at the head of the table. And somewhere between the second and third course, she understood what Rodion was doing. He was waiting for Vasily to be the one who broke the silence about Veska. Because in the language of this room, the man who first spoke a name had given that name to the conversation, and the man who had given the name had revealed something about why he had given it. It came halfway through the third course. You know, Rodion, Vasily said, swirling his wine, this month is a difficult month for you, is it not? I always think of you this month, of your loss. It was 15 years ago this November, Rodion said evenly. Yes, 15. So long. And still no answers, I imagine. No answers. Yet. A terrible thing. The death of a young woman. Her name was, forgive me, my memory, Veska. Veska. Yes. Veska Varanova. A beautiful name. I knew her, you know. Only briefly. At her debut. She had her mother's eyes. Rodion did not move. Noemi saw the muscle in his jaw set once, and release. She had my father's eyes, Rodion said quietly. Did she? Forgive me. An old man's memory. Of course. The conversation moved on. Noemi sat with her hands folded in her lap and understood that she had just witnessed something no one else in the room, not even Rodion, had quite caught. Vasily had said her mother's eyes. But Veska had not had her mother's eyes. Rodion had just corrected him. And the correction had been received with the dismissive, "Forgive me," an old man's memory of a man who had absolutely not made a memory mistake. Men like Vasily Marisov did not misremember the eyes of women they had encountered only at debuts. He had said her mother's eyes because, 15 years ago, when he had been shown a photograph of the girl he had ordered killed, the man who brought him the photograph had told him she has her mother's eyes. And Vasily, old, dessert drunk on the unexpected entertainment of the evening, had reached for the wrong sentence from the wrong shelf of his memory. Rodion had not heard it. He had been too far inside his own grief to catch a slip that small. And Noemi was the only person at the table who knew that Vasily Marisov had just confessed. She had a choice. She could let the dinner end. She could let Rodion search for the next 10 years, the next 20, the rest of his life, for an answer that had been spoken aloud at this table tonight, and that he had missed. Or she could speak. She took a small sip of water. She set down the glass. And in the small lull between the third course and the fourth, in a voice that was not loud, but was clear enough to carry the length of the long table, Noemi Bastidas, the maid in the green dress, said, "Forgive me, Mr. Marisov, you said Veska Varanova had her mother's eyes." 40 heads turned. Vasily looked at her with the patient indulgence of an old man being addressed by a child. "Yes, my dear?" She didn't. The room was so silent that Noemi could hear, somewhere in the kitchens far below, a single dropped fork. "I'm sorry?" Vasily said. She had her father's eyes. "Mr. Varanov just corrected you. You said forgive me, an old man's memory." "But, sir," she kept her voice steady, "men like you do not misremember the eyes of women you have only seen once at a debut. So I find myself wondering, where did you see Veska Varanova's eyes that someone described them to you 15 years ago as her mother's?" The dining hall did not breathe. Vasily's face stayed perfectly still. But something behind his face moved, old machinery, calculating very quickly, calculating that this was not a question that should have been asked, and was now a question that had been asked, and could not be unasked, in front of every family of consequence in the country. Rodion turned his head slowly and looked at her. She did not look back. She kept her eyes on Vasily. "Child, you are confused." "No, sir," Noemi said. "I'm a maid. I've spent 9 months listening to men in expensive rooms try to remember things they should not remember. I know exactly what it sounds like when one of them slips." The enormous man across from her began, very slowly, to rise from his chair. He did not finish rising, because at the far end of the dining hall, old Esposito Ran set down his fork with a small, deliberate click, looked at Vasily Marisov, and said, in a voice that was almost mild, "Vasily, sit your man down." The girl asked a fair question. "I would like, very much, to hear the answer." The enormous man froze halfway out of his chair. He looked at Vasily. Vasily did not look back. The enormous man, slowly, with the dignity of a man who had been publicly unleashed and publicly recalled in the space of 4 seconds, lowered himself back into his seat. Old Esposito Ran was not finished. "I, too, remember Veska Varanova. I danced with her once at her debut. She was a kind girl. She had her father's eyes." He picked up his wine. "I have sat at this table for 40 years, Vasily, through your father's time and your time. I have not asked questions I was not invited to ask, but I would like, tonight, to ask one. Where did you see Veska Varanova's eyes, that you remember them as her mother's?" The room had become a courtroom. Vasily Marisov sat at the head of his own table and understood that the question was not going away. He tried. "Once." "Old friend, you are taking the word of a maid. I am taking the word of the only person at this table tonight who has nothing to gain by lying, which is, Vasily, a thing I have not been able to say about anyone at this table in a very long time." A murmur moved down the table, 40 men recalculating where the power in the room now sat. The Veit twins exchanged a second glance. The Okonko patriarch leaned slowly back. Two of the younger Marisovs looked at their grandfather and, for the first time in their lives, did not know what their grandfather was about to do. Vasily knew. He had two choices. He could deny and the table would press, and the gathering would dissolve into the slow, formal process by which a head of family was unseated by his peers. Or he could confess, and Rodion Varanov, sitting 3 feet to his right with a butter knife within reach, would settle the matter with his own hand, and Vasily would not see the morning. He chose, in the end, the third thing. The thing only the very old and the very tired choose. He chose to tell the truth. It was a long time ago, he said. Your father, he said to Rodion, without turning to look at him, had become a problem. He had refused 3 arrangements. He was building, in his quiet way, something that would have ended me. I sent a man. I gave him a photograph. I told him to send a message. I did not specify which member of the household. I left it to him. He chose your sister because she was the easiest to reach. The man who described the photograph to me said she has her mother's eyes. I have remembered her that way ever since. I am sorry, Rodion, for all of it. He looked, for the first time, at Rodion. I am an old man, and I have done many things, and I will not insult you by asking forgiveness. I will only say it was me. Rodion did not move. He sat in his chair at Vasily's right hand for what felt to Noemi like an eternity. His hands stayed folded on the table in front of him, the way a man's hands stay folded when he is afraid of what they will do if he unfolds them. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. Vasily, you are not going to die tonight. The room exhaled. You are going to live for as many years as God still has patience for you, and every man at this table is going to know what you did. You confessed in front of every family that matters. You will not be the head of anything by morning. That is your punishment. Not death. Smallness. The same smallness you have spent your life inflicting on people who did not deserve it. Live in it, Vasily. Choke on it. He stood. He looked down the length of the table at old Esposito ran, and inclined his head once a small, formal gesture of debt acknowledged. He turned to Noemi. Miss Bastidas, I think we are finished with dinner. She rose. She walked the length of the dining hall on Rodion's arm, past 40 men who had each become 40 different men than they had been at the soup course, and out through the great double doors, down the long staircase, and across the marble lobby, and the small, sharp-faced man in the charcoal suit who had stopped her on the way in, stepped out of her path, bowed his head, and said nothing. In the portico, under the warm yellow lights, Yannick Petrescu was leaning against a column with an empty glass and an expression that suggested he had heard, somehow, more than he should have. Whenever you are ready, Miss Bastidas. The number on the card is good for the rest of my life. She nodded. She got into the car alone, she had insisted, again, and Rodion stood in the portico and watched her drive away, with the look of a man who had been carrying something for 15 years and had just set it down. She did not sleep. She had given the driver her aunt's address instead of the estate. Some instinct older than thinking had told her that the Varanov house, tonight, was not where she should be. So she sat on her aunt's couch in the dark with her shoes off, and Thomas Ferraro's small leather-sheathed knife resting on the coffee table in front of her, and watched, through the thin curtain, the gray of the city sky as it slowly considered becoming morning. By 6 a.m., the news had begun. It came not in a single story, but in a slow, strange wave. Marisov family in turmoil. Sudden withdrawal of Vasily Marisov from public affairs. Sources at last night's private gathering at the Sabelrock confirm a confrontation. By 9, Yannick Petrescu's piece had run in the Continental Ledger, careful, lawyered, naming nothing it could not name, but built around a single anonymous quote that had become, by lunchtime, the most reposted sentence in the country. I'm a maid. I've spent 9 months listening to men in expensive rooms try to remember things they should not remember. I know exactly what it sounds like when one of them slips. By noon, 3 things had happened. The first, Esteban's account had been signed, witnessed, notarized, and funded. Rodion had done it on Friday, as promised. The lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Marguerite Vetrov, sent a confirmation by courier. Whatever came next, Esteban's medicine was paid for. Forever. The second. Mirabel Quesada arrived at Noemi's aunt's apartment at 11:45 with a single small suitcase. Inside were Noemi's books, her grandmother's silver pendant chain, the deep green dress folded with the kind of care Mirabel reserved for things she respected, and a sealed envelope. Mirabel set the suitcase at the door, looked at Noemi, and said quietly, "Whatever happened in that hotel, thank you," and walked away. The envelope contained a key, an address, and 4 words in Rodion's hand: "When you are ready." The third. Yannick Petrescu was at her aunt's door at 1 in the afternoon with a paper bag of pastries. "You don't have to talk to me. I am here as a friend who is also, regrettably, a journalist. Please consider me, in that order." She let him in. They sat at her aunt's small kitchen table and she drank coffee from a chipped cup. He waited. He was, she noticed, very good at waiting. "I don't want to be famous," she said finally. "You're already famous. That ship has sailed. Then I want to be famous for the right thing, which is..." She thought about her brother, asleep in the next room. She thought about Felicidad Quirino sewing dresses for women who refused to apologize for existing. She thought about Tomas pressing a knife into her hand and saying, "Come back." She thought about her grandmother saying the seen are always the first to be hunted, and she thought, for the first time, that her grandmother had been right about almost everything except the conclusion. The seen were the first to be hunted, but they were also the first to be heard. "I want to be famous for what people like me hear." What does that mean? It means there are thousands of women in this city right now who clean houses, serve dinners, stand behind chairs, and hear things they are not supposed to hear. Things that, if anyone listened to them, would change the shape of who is powerful and who is not. I was lucky. I was in the right room at the right moment, and the right man took me seriously. Most of the women I know will never have that luck. She paused. I want to build something for them. Somewhere they can be heard. Somewhere they are believed. He set down his coffee. "Miss Bastidas, you are going to be a great deal of trouble for a great many people." "Yes, I would very much like to help." She pulled out the envelope Mirabel had brought, and the small key inside it, and the address in Rodion's careful handwriting. "In that case, I think we should find out what's at this address." The address was a narrow 3-story building on a quiet street in the old Printers District, 2 blocks from the river. It had been, the deed showed, a small private library in the 1930s, a community reading room in the 1960s, empty since 1991. Rodion had bought it 11 days ago. She and Yannick let themselves in with the small brass key. The interior smelled of dust and old paper. Tall windows, wide oak floors, a staircase with a curved banister that wanted, very badly, to be polished. There was an envelope on the windowsill. "Miss Bastidas, this building is yours. Do with it what you wish. If you wish nothing of it, sell it. The money is yours also. I owe you several things I do not have words for, so I have offered the one thing I do have. R." She stood in the middle of the empty floor with the letter in her hand and looked up at the high tin ceiling. "What are you going to do with it?" Yannick asked quietly. She looked at the windows and the floors and the curved banister and the long, slow river of dust moving in the late afternoon light. "I'm going to call it the Listening House." That was 3 years ago. The Listening House, La Casa de la Escucha, opened 13 months after that afternoon. It is, today, the only legal aid and witness protection nonprofit in the country, specifically for domestic workers. Its volunteer attorneys handle wage disputes, abuse cases, immigration matters, and once, memorably, in its second year, a cartel-adjacent embezzlement case that began with a housekeeper noticing the wrong ledger book on the wrong desk. Yannick Petrescu sits on its board. So does Marguerite Vetrov. So does Mirabel Quesada, who quietly resigned from the Varanov household 6 months after the gathering and has, since, become a fearsomely competent operations director. Esteban Bastidas finished secondary school the spring after the Sablarok dinner. He started medical school last September. Tomas Ferraro retired from the Varanov estate 2 years ago. He runs a small kitchen attached to the listening house, where he feeds anyone who walks in, free, no questions asked. He has, on 3 separate occasions, asked for the small leather-sheathed knife back. She has refused. It sits in a glass case behind her desk, with a small brass plate that reads simply, Pa Revolver. T. F. Felicidad Quirino is 83. She still sews. The deep green dress hangs, framed in a shadow box, in the front room of the listening house. Vasily Morisov died of a stroke 14 months after the gathering. By then, he had been quietly stripped of every formal position he had ever held. His own family did not attend the funeral. Old Esposito Rand sent a single white flower. And Rodion Varanov sold the estate. He sold most of the holdings. The ones he could not sell legally, he liquidated into a trust whose only purpose was to make him slowly poorer for the rest of his life, a process he describes as the closest thing to penance available to a man like me. He lives now in a small house outside the city. He keeps no men in dark coats. He visits the listening house on Thursdays. He is teaching himself, badly, to cook. He and Noemi did not become what either of them, perhaps, had begun to wonder whether they might become. They became something else. A friendship made of the kind of seeing that happens between two people who have set down something they had been carrying for too long. He calls her Miss Bastidas. She calls him Mr. Varanov. They are, between themselves, the only two people in the world who know exactly how funny this is. Once, last November, on the 15th anniversary, plus 3 years, of his sister's death, he came to the listening house with a small framed photograph in his hand. He set it on the corner of Noemi's desk, beside the glass case with the knife in it. It was a photograph of a young woman with her father's eyes. "I thought," he said, "that she should be somewhere she would be seen." Noemi walked around to where he stood. She looked at the photograph. "She is Rodion." He nodded once. He left. The photograph is still there. There is, near the front door of the listening house, a small brass plaque. It is the only sign in the building. Visitors miss it on the way in. They notice it on the way out. It reads, "No one ever wants to die alone in a study. Everyone deserves a witness. Bring yours here." That is the whole story. A maid walked into the wrong room one night, carrying a stack of folded linens. She said a sentence she was not supposed to say. And because she said it, because one sentence, said softly, in the dark, by a person who had spent her whole life being told her voice did not matter, a man set down a 15-year grief. A girl was avenged. An empire fell. And a building 2 blocks from the river became a place where the people who clean the floors of this country can, for the first time, be heard. She did not become rich. She did not become a celebrity. She did not become a symbol. She became, instead, the one thing she had spent 26 years being told she could not be. A woman who was seen. And who, having been seen, turned around and made it her life's work to see everyone else. If this story moved you tonight, if you have ever cleaned a floor, served a meal, cleared a table, or stood quietly in a corner of a room while someone richer or louder pretended you were not there, drop a single word in the comments. Heard. I want to see how many of you are out there. Until next time, be well. Be brave. And if you walk into the wrong room one night and find someone weeping in the dark, say the soft thing. You never know whose life is on the other side of it.